live. We're here at 3 o'clock Rock on Community Matters here on a given Monday. We're moving past statehood. We're talking about what comes next in the evolution of Hawaii. It's heavy stuff. With Ray Tsuchiyama, he's an informed citizen, and he has a lot on his plate in terms of he has been an observer of these things for a long time. And his ideas are really scintillating with possibility. So we'd love to talk to him. Welcome to the show, Ray.
Well, thank you very much. And you're absolutely right that statehood in 1959 was a disruptive moment in Hawaiian history. And it catapulted Hawaii before this very small string of rocks in the middle of the Pacific during World War II, through Pearl Harbor, of course. It became very famous, into a state equivalent to New York, Texas, California, all of us overnight. And that was after Alaska. Now, of course, if you go back in time, there were some people in the Senate, in the Congress, who did not look positively toward a state with a very large non-Caucasian population. And the leadership of Hawaii, the state, decided Alaska first kind of strategy. So Alaska went first, they got statehood, and everybody thought that Alaska would emerge very dynamic, but right now, Hawaii, population-wise, and this is a big point, is over 1.2, 1.3 million residents. The state of Alaska is barely 750,000. So we are bigger than Alaska in population. And that's one of the things that we have to talk about, because it introduced a boom in population, whereas the focus has been on other things. But I think one of the things that really, by becoming a state, the population boom occurred.
How? I mean, what was it? Where did they come from? What were they doing? What drew them to our shores?
Well, it didn't occur overnight. And in fact, if I lived on Maui for several years, and people forget, from 1945, the end of the war, till the late 70s, the Maui population actually declined because they had one business, sugar. People began leaving for Honolulu. People began leaving from Kauai. The whole coffee industry on the Kona side of the Hawaii Island collapsed during the late 50s and 60s. And there's a group of people in Oahu called the Kona Club, whose roots go back to that closing of the coffee plantations. All roads began to lead to Oahu. Pearl Harbor, the military, the Vietnam War, UH, banking, Bishop Street, insurance. There was a huge rise in population on Oahu. And so the neighbor islands did not enjoy a similar rise until the 80s and 90s. And Maui, of course, during the 90s and 2000s became one of the fastest growing areas, especially Kihei in South Maui, and now is 165,000 people. Before the war and after the war, when my father was there, it was barely 45,000 people and completely self-sufficient. So population, the economy was centered on Oahu.
You know, just to have a footnote on that, before statehood, seems to me, and you lived on Maui, so you can speak to this, the connection, the nexus between the neighbor islands and Oahu was pretty robust. This is before a lot of aircraft. It was when there were steamers steaming between the islands on a regular basis. So it was a heavy schedule of steamers. People were visiting family. They had family. It was not unusual for a family on Maui to have members of that family on 2 or 3 other islands. And it wasn't necessarily a differentiation between neighbor islands versus Oahu. It was all the islands, and there were connections, families, and people talk about, you know, the old days. They talk about how they were actively involved in some other neighbor island. Somewhere after statehood, it's worthy of a whole discussion, I think, the islands began to drift away from each other. Now, it could be that because we got airplanes and the steamers went away, and it became more difficult, more expensive, whatever, a different way of dealing with the neighbor islands. The neighbor islands, not only did they reduce in population in favor of Oahu, but they reduced in connection among themselves and with the people on Oahu and other neighbor islands. And that changed some essential quality of the state, that phenomenon all by itself.
That's a complicated question.
Yes, I know.
Because if you go back in time during the kingdom, under King Kamehameha III and others, they were actively seeking to keep the islands together all the time. That is why, if you compare Hawaii state to the mainland, why is there just one school board for the entire state? Why is the state so centralized that when you put coins in the meter of the city and county, it goes to the state? Taxation, you see how centralized. There is no mayor of Kailua, no mayor of Lihui, no mayor of Hilo, that takes place other than, so you have, on the mainland, you can have a school board for a town of 10,000. But no, we have one centralized state. Back in the early 19th century, the leadership of the kingdom was very, very actively seeking to thwart the island Kauai going to Russia, the Maui going with England, and so forth and so on. They tried to keep the islands together. So sometimes when we talk about the state and how onerous the state is in terms of bureaucracy and overreaching and containing itself, and from the neighbor island perspective, they refer to the state of Oahu. I'm serious. Everything runs on Oahu time. Oahu, it just is.
And there's a resentment there.
Yeah, there's a tremendous resentment but however, that's complex because for a Maui or even a Molokai is 7,500 people, which was made into a part of Molokai County in the early 20th century, where before it used to report directly to the kingdom in Honolulu. So these are artificial counties when you think about it, and so forth. So why I refer to Molokai is that when you think about the taxes paid by Molokai residents, and the monies that go back into Molokai, there is a disconnect.
The tax is greater than the benefit?
Well, the benefits are far greater than the taxes paid by Molokai residents, for example.
But Molokai is a good example of what I call insular drift, where these islands are drifting apart conceptually, in terms of relationships, in terms of sensibilities about the other place. And what's really sad about Molokai is that they don't want tourists there. They don't want people from Oahu there. The fishing boats, they can't come there. There are no cruise liners that go there, even though they could. They don't want people from other islands, especially Oahu, to come to Molokai. What kind of a thing is that?
And when you go back to statehood in '59, people voted overwhelmingly statehood because that would be one state.
Yes.
All the islands together, moving together, and it would mean that little Kauai, economically, or Molokai, or Lanai, whatever, could not exist in the world without the larger islands supporting it, especially Oahu. So there is a kind of an economic give and take there, but they voted for statehood because they thought that everybody would rise up economically and financially, and their lives would be better in terms of schooling. And so the thought is, going back to the kingdom even today, the thought is that the same level of schooling will be in Lihui to Kahala to the Hilo, right? That is the concept.
Fairness, it's equality.
Yes, ideally, yes. The same health service should be in Lihui, in Kahala, and in Hilo, and in Kahului. That's, again, the ideal. That's what statehood meant to people, because they had a disparity. If you lived in Waimea on the island of Kauai, there was a disparity of living in downtown in Honolulu. And so they believed very much in 59 that everybody will rise up to the same level and that there will be first-class citizens within their own state. You see what I mean?
Yes.
Because people believe that they were second-class citizens as a territory vis-a-vis the mainland U.S., which was the great...
Very profound.
Great. So, but there was a great turnout of people who expected a level of playing field, and they because of the disparities of high and low in the society.
Yeah, and this goes to our larger discussion, which we should spend some real time on. That is the expectations of the people in the state. Forget about what Congress expected or how Alaska saw us and all that. The expectations of people in the state coming off the plantations or coming in from the Big Five crowd, what did they think was going to happen? Remember all those smiley pictures?
Oh, yeah.
Celebrations in 1959. The world was our oyster. We're going to be really fabulous. What you know, part of it, of course, was what you just said, sort of equality, uniformity of benefits, pulling together of all the islands. That's only part of it, though. Can you describe the rest of it? What did people expect? What did they want at the time? What were those faces so smiley about?
And you have to go back to what I said about my father's generation before the war in education. It was very good. They had radios. They had cars. Remember, in a third world country, they're just getting TVs. They're just getting cars and getting on the road. They had cars in the 30s before their standard of living was rising, but that set off expectations. They had very good education, as English standard education back before the war. Patsy Ming's father, on Paia, was the first Japanese American graduate of the University of Hawaii in the 20s. So you could see rising expectations through education. Patsy Ming would get a law degree at Chicago. Inoue would get his law degree in Georgetown. So their high school, McKinley and Maui High School, was great preparation for them.
But I think inherent in what you're saying, though, it's really important, is that, okay, it was a bit of a surprise. Everything is going well. We're having good education. We're increasing our standard of living. But when you make that analysis, you're also saying that before that started happening, things weren't so good. Say at the time of territorialization, say in the time of World War I, it wasn't so good. Life on the plantations wasn't so good.
Right.
Education, standard of living wasn't so good.
It wasn't as so good, but of course, why did people come to plantations, right? My grandparents left in 1907 from Kumamoto Prefecture to Japan. About 15 years before, in 1894, Harry Baldwin from Maui graduated from MIT in civil engineering. So the Big Five were thinking ahead. They were bringing new types of irrigation and science and technology back to plantations, which would bring people there. And comparatively speaking, my grandparents had a better life on Maui than in Japan. And their children, my father's generation, would enjoy English language education. And then during the war, and the war was a great catalyst, they saw Rome, they saw New York, they saw London, they saw California. They also saw segregation in the South. And they brought this all back to Hawaii and say, oh, we can develop a new society equal to the mainland. With remember Inoue and Yoshinaga and Beppo, all these 442nd veterans were in their barely in their late 20s and early 30s. It was a young crowd there in '59.
Very vital, and they had come through the war. They were fearless. And they figured they could really do some stuff.
And they wanted to be equivalent to the mainland society.
So during the 50s, they ramped up. They became politically conscious. Right. They were not conscious before then. Organizations, unions, all of a sudden turned into more powerful organizations. And began controlling political structures. And by 1959, I'm trying to catch all these things at the same time. By 1959, we were going to build a utopia, a nirvana. We were going to come crashing into the 20th century.
I remember on the mainland, things were going the same way. In 1960-61, there would be a president barely 42, 43 years old, Mr. Kennedy.
Same thing.
Kennedy. And the New Deal will be coming up very soon. So it was in the East-West Center, and also the beginning of the war, Vietnam War, that would also begin to
Well, they say the Vietnam War had a very destructive effect on the country in general. But query, this is not an easy question. What kind of effect did the Vietnam War have on Hawaii?
Tremendous positive experience for Hawaii because remember, where did tens of thousands of GIs take their R&R experience? It was in Waikiki. And they brought their wives and families to meet them in Waikiki. It was a glorious, and that led to a building boom within Waikiki for all these GIs and their families, and it was an awakening. They would go back to Kansas or New York or Michigan or Louisiana and says, let's go back. And that would start the repeat visitor boom in Hawaii. So, and again, because of military investment in Pearl Harbor, Hickam, Wheeler, and so forth, Schofield, there was a huge rise in federal spending and employment in Hawaii.
Yeah. Let's take a short break, Ray. This is like a fire hydrant of information, things we need to know about. because if you don't study history, remember history, you are doomed to repeat it. What was his name? Who
George
said that?
Santayana.
Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
Aloha everyone, I'm Maria Mera and I'm here to invite you to my bilingual show Viva Hawaii on ThinkTech Hawaii every other Monday at 3 p.m. We are here to talk about news, issues and events local and around the world. Join me. Aloha.
Aloha, my name is Josh Green. I serve as senator from the Big Island on the Kona side, and I'm also an emergency room physician. My program here on ThinkTech is called Healthcare in Hawaii. I'll have guests that should be interesting to you twice a month. We'll talk about issues that range from mental health care to drug addiction to our healthcare system and any challenges that we face here in Hawaii. We hope you'll join us. Again, thanks for supporting ThinkTech.
Aloha, I'm Kauai Lucas, host of Hawaii is My Mainland every Friday here on ThinkTech Hawaii. I also have a blog of the same name at kauailucas.com where you can see all of my past shows. Join me this Friday and every Friday at 3 p.m. Aloha.
Bingo. Okay, so we're back, and we have this, utopian view, this dream, and it's reinforced by at least the first part of the Kennedy administration. And we have the Vietnam War, at least in the first blush, was pretty positive. We had all these soldiers and sailors here. We had the blooming of the military establishment. It was all good, but now let me ask you again. So on the mainland now, in that same period, late 60s, it was turning pretty sour, and there was all kinds of unhappiness in the generation, and in fact, in the country in general. Did that ever reach Hawaii? There was a certain amount of protest, but I'm not sure that it was profound. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I would say yes and no. There was an incident at Bachman Hall, University of Hawaii, involving the then President Thomas Hamilton and the occupation of Bachman Hall. That occurred about '68. And so there was a lot of turmoil, and the burning of the ROTC building back in that time. There was still ROTC at UH.
And spilling the blood on the files, remember that?
Well, yes, and
I think
also
Neil Abercrombie was involved.
and of course there were deserters who camped out at the Church of the Crossroads. So there was and some unions, liberal unions, also supported the end of the war. And Patsy Mink, of course, ran on an anti-war platform. I mean, she was the first person from Hawaii actually running in a presidential election that we forget about. So there was feelings, and there was a nascent kind of connection with the Newark riots and the civil rights movement among the Hawaiian community at that time.
Yeah.
There was just
there was
an awakening.
resonance there.
There was an awakening, the first real awakening in the late 60s.
Of the Native Hawaiian
Native
movement.
Hawaiian movement
Yeah.
in terms of music, in terms of hula, in terms of looking back at the overthrow. That did not exist. I barely had 1 year of Hawaiian history in Kalakaua Intermediate, for example. I rarely heard Hawaiian music. It was at the home or in Waikiki.
Yeah.
So that really didn't transform itself. And then there would be periodically every 10 years kind of a revisiting, Renaissance kind of thing in the Hawaiian community. But that was the first time something happened.
So until, this whole thing about R&R, rest and recreation, and the military, and Fort DeRussy, and all that, it seems to me that people have to appreciate that Hawaii was like on the other side of the ocean. Hawaii is not, right now we take it on, we make an assumption that Hawaii is connected with the country every minute of every day. Internet, television, all that.
Right.
But in those days, the television shows were flown in on planes. It was not directly streamed. The culture was really local. And even McDonald's didn't get here until the late 60s. And it was all Okazuya until that time. That we had a special culture, and it was not necessarily including, people away from Hawaii or ideas that came from far away. And I guess the question, it's like the French protecting their culture. There were some people who wanted to protect the old times, still do, and there were other people saying, no, let's bring it on. And there were an enormous number of people that came with the R&R movement and during the time of Vietnam to make their lives here.
Oh, yes, yes.
And that's always an interesting phenomenon, making your life in another place, because you bring your skills, your way of looking at things, and your expectations with you, and then ultimately, especially in this kind of disparity of culture, you try to change the place you just arrived at, and you block other people from following you in the pipeline. This is a very traumatic, I think, also a disruptive thing to have so many people coming here in such a short period of time, late 60s. Yeah.
Well, you're correct about the culture changing because at the time in mid to late 60s, there was a vibrant locally made TV business, including Checkers and Pogo Pogo, Captain Honolulu for Children.
Don't forget Filipino Fiesta.
Filipino
and
Fiesta.
Senor Espucio.
That's
Don't forget him.
Lipia Spinda on the commercials and a lot of professional wrestling. And you're correct that the news would be very, local, and that you would look away when they show show the scores on the mainland. And you're correct that you would wait, and then you watch the show after football or basketball show. So so there was a local culture, and then if you fast forward to now, Costco's is where you meet your friends. It's your neighborhood.
Or McDonald's.
Yeah, or McDonald's. And you're correct that the many smaller mom and pops, okazuya, Chinese chop suey, neighborhood places in Pauoa or Kalihi, they're all gone. They're all gone. And you're right that the mainland types of fast foods and so forth really took over a lot of the cuisines and in Hawaii.
I think part of this imagery that you're building about the expectation of people here in the around statehood, early 60s, was they wanted to have these mainland influences.
Right.
They wanted to be just as advanced as anywhere in the mainland. And looking back retrospectively, may not have been the greatest thing in the world to do that, but that was the expectation, and they wanted it. And the question is, it took a long time, by the way. It didn't come right away. It's not like you snap your fingers in 1963, and everything comes rolling in on you. I remember some pictures of the development of the downtown area, state capitol building, around statehood, a lot of construction in that area. It was a mess. It was dirt roads, and Kalanianiole out to Kaiser there.
Right.
That was largely a dirt road, 2-lane road, nothing much. Go west to Red Hill, it was a dirt road. Took you forever, took you hours to get out there. People don't realize how it changed, and it took a long time before we developed things like freeways.
Right.
And I wonder retrospectively whether we had a plan, or we just sort of opened our hearts and our minds and said, come invest your money here, build your stuff, and whether we managed that at all or let it go topsy-turvy.
And it's a great question because in '59, if you ask people what they were voting for, they wanted to become Americans. What was it to become American? You see, and if,
No more pigeon.
Well,
no more pigeon.
well, if somebody was going to go take a survey in Asia, India, says, what is America to you? Oh, it is innovation. It is high tech. It is high standards of education. Okay? Now, that's what one image is. The other image is loss of manufacturing. Empty jobs, exports coming in, and nothing made in America. Service industry only, McDonald's and finance or whatever, only kind of things. And so there are some parts of America that we are part of and not. So
Sure.
After the decades, are we more like Peoria or are we more like Palo Alto? Silicon Valley. You see what I mean? Because when you say America, there's many Americas. I mean, America of Peoria, Illinois, or in the Rust Belt of Cleveland, and downtown Palo Alto or LA or New York City, quite different. There's different Americas
But you make
going
a
on.
composite.
Yeah.
You see them, you jumble them all together, and you sort of build a Mr. Potato Man kind of American dream. And I can't help but thinking of that scene
Yeah.
in Miss Saigon, where the guy jumps on the hood of a yellow convertible, yellow Cadillac convertible, and he sings his song, The American Dream.
Okay, so we're at a point where has Hawaii become part of America? But which America? Kind of,
Right.
which America are we more like in that we define ourselves, or we're making our own world? Because let's hold this point. Suppose we went in '59. We went to Bangkok, Seoul, Tokyo, Manila, Singapore, right? And we saw how everything was at that point in those cities. And we look at Honolulu. I would bet on Honolulu, English language, university, investment in education. Though that's what will make people coming on a plantation, education. We were on the swing there. And then the last 20, 30 years, you see Bangkok developing, medical tourism, infrastructure, a lot of things. Singapore,
We got to talk about
yeah,
that kind of thing, how they
yeah,
eclipsed us.
Yeah, '59, I would never put money on at one point, there's certain countries though, like the Philippines was advancing and faster economically than Japan in the early '60s, and then
Yeah.
it stopped
Yeah.
because of corruption.
Yeah.
And Japan just
Yeah.
took off.
See what
like that.
can happen.
In
If you
'59,
don't keep the right mental set,
Yeah.
it falls apart.
my uncle was mailing penicillin to my relatives in Japan. They had no medicine. We were shipping spam and all kinds of corned beef to Japan. They had no protein. And then in 20 years, it's the opposite. They're coming here with yen to buy kahala.
Let's talk about
Yeah.
those shopping centers. I don't think we give enough credit for the effort and the impact of those shopping centers. And I'll name three: Kahala Mall, Ala Moana, and Pearl Ridge. Those have had a salient effect on Oahu and probably on the state, and if not in direct terms, then in setting the pace for other places. But what was 1964, I think, that Ala Moana was done.
Out of the duck farms there.
Sometime after
Yeah.
that was Kahala Mall,
Right.
which was a little wee
Right.
grocery
$100
store or
mall.
something, and those guys packaged it. And it was not local investors. I thought that was so interesting. In both cases, nobody locally could figure out what to do. They were busy building these, small rental units or condos up in Waikiki, but nobody was really putting capital together for big things like Ala Moana or, for that matter, Kahala Mall. And what I get out of it is that you have to have a certain mental, picture of the future
Right.
if you were going to put in that kind of money. And we had it, but we didn't want to put the money in. We weren't fully committed. And then these guys came to town. They came to town with millions and millions, and they built the structures we should have built. That's what happened.
And that ended many, in Kaimuki, Kalihi, many areas just collapsed, business-wise, and all roads led to Ala Moana in the end.
And when we start this conversation up again, Ray, I hope it's soon, we'll take off on retail. We'll talk about the connection of retail and tourism and real estate and see how that, usurped the economy and the culture of the state, and when it happened and why it happened and how that effect is still being felt today. Ray Tsuchiyama. And